A crazy rain-soaked final qualifying section ended off the running for F1 on Friday during its first sprint weekend of the 2024 season. It ended with Norris taking pole. Hamilton. Sorry, Norris. Confusing, right? The rain wasn't the only chaos during the last session of the day, which saw Norris post that time on a wet lap that was deleted, then reinstated only a couple of minutes later. Did you enjoy the first day of running? At least Q3 was highly entertaining, right? In the seconds following Norris's deletion, Lewis Hamilton temporarily held pole position, with the Mercedes struggling in the dry until coming alive in Hamilton's hands as the track conditions changed. The session was stopped by yet another grass fire on the side of the track, after one in practice earlier, which the FIA has linked to the car's sparks. The brief delay between the first and second segments to clean things up meant that the anticipated rain came in the last minutes of SQ2, shutting out any second attempts. By SQ3, it had completely drenched the track. Each of the 10 drivers who made it through picked intermediates to compete for sprint pole, and there were no takes on the wet compound, despite drivers obviously trying to keep their cars on the track. One of those drivers, Charles Leclerc, crashed into the barriers early on, but he was able to pull himself out of the gravel, and his Ferrari miraculously escaped severe damage. Nobody else had such a spectacular off, but there were plenty of off-track excursions, including ones that lost Lando Norris and Max Verstappen laps. Norris's brief phantom lap deletion was also connected to that, with the McLaren driver going off at the last corner on the previous push lap, which would ordinarily have resulted in him losing the following lap as well, albeit providing no benefit in these conditions. Hamilton still had an opportunity to reply, as Mercedes timed their run plan perfectly, allowing the Briton to begin his final flying lap a few of seconds before the checkered flag. But despite his improvements, he was still 1.261 seconds behind Norris. The FIA explained that Norris's time was initially erased because the British driver left the track at the last corner on the lap before his fastest time. However, a spokesperson stated that Norris did not gain an advantage by driving off into the gravel, as he rejoined the track at a reduced pace to begin the lap that would go on to be the fastest. Andrea Stella, McLaren's team boss, spoke following the session. "We think it might have been because in the lap before he went off at the last corner," he said. "They might have thought that in this case, having been off at the last corner, it has implications for the following lap. The following lap was the pole lap, and that lap is completely clean, so there's no problem at all." Stella confirmed that McLaren wasn't interacting with race control, and the stewards had reinstated the lap without request. "It was reinstated by the FIA themselves," he said. "Definitely, because he went off at the last corner, you launch at a much lower speed. Effectively, Lando lost almost 3/10 because he's been off at the last corner." Toto Wolff, Mercedes' team boss, said he had no objections to Norris's lap being reinstated, given that the circumstances of the incident meant the McLaren driver would have gone faster with a cleaner start to the lap. "I haven't seen the detail. I've just seen he had 4 tyres off track," he said. "But honestly, that goes even slower. So he could have probably gone faster, so I'm okay with that." Speaking after taking the sprint qualifying pole position, Norris admitted he was anxious about the impending rain since he was satisfied with the performance of his McLaren in the dry. "I'm extremely happy, first of all. So big thanks to the whole team," he went on to say. "It was tricky. You're always nervous going into a session like this, especially for quali when you know it's going to rain. I was quite happy with how it was in the dry. I think we have a good pace all weekend so far. I got a bit nervous, but the conditions were just where you're going to risk a lot. You've got to push to build tyre temperature and so forth. But I was quick. I just kept catching the Ferrari. I had to keep backing off, so I didn't do the first few laps well at all. But I got a good final one, good enough one for pole, so I'm happy. Sad it's not for a proper qualifying, but good enough." Asked whether it was just a case of staying out on track and keeping up the push as the rain intensified, Norris said, "You only have 3 laps, and the first 2 I aborted on both. So I was like, the last lap was all or nothing, but it was getting wetter and wetter. So actually, the conditions for the final 2 laps were a lot worse than the second lap at least, so I was a little bit nervous. I made a few mistakes and started to aquaplane quite a bit. But it was good fun, gets your heart going. To end up on top is exactly what we wanted. Nice surprise and a good position for tomorrow." But that wasn't all, as the first and only practice of the weekend in China showed us enough chaos. It led to an interesting opening practice session at Formula One's Chinese Grand Prix. The revised format for 2024 meant that Friday's lone 60-minute practice session would directly head into qualifying for the sprint race rather than the Grand Prix. But one thing remained constant at the Shanghai International Circuit. As is customary when FP1 begins a sprint weekend, strategy varied greatly as teams worked out how to best analyze the circuit, the tires and their cars, before committing to a qualifying setup. And it was another case of chaos on track, especially since it has been resurfaced only last year. And with little to no action on the track, the F1 drivers were set up with a slippery track. That resulted in an unexpected pecking order led by Aston Martin's Lance Stroll and McLaren driver Oscar Piastri, with Max Verstappen lurking in third place, hinting at a more typical competitive scenario. Unsurprisingly, drivers took some time to adjust to a Shanghai track that had been at least partially resurfaced since F1 last used it 5 years ago. However, it did not appear to be as severe as some had anticipated on Thursday. However, the track itself was definitely still challenging. Several drivers took tiny snaps under power or raced deep into some of the track's slower corners as they tested the limits. There were also at least 2 pit lane entry blips, one for Fernando Alonso and one for Piastri. Both overshot the approach as the entry tightens and turns left into the pit lane. In Alonso's case, he locked up and had to weave past the escape road obstacles, pirouette and rejoin, whilst Piastri stopped, reversed and restarted his McLaren. Another bizarre pit lane entry incident happened between Lewis Hamilton and Piastri, when Piastri slowed to allow a Red Bull to pass before the last turn, but then did not let Hamilton pass as the Mercedes driver expected. Hamilton locked up and went straight on at the final turn, so he chose to go over into the pit lane and earned a black and white penalty for crossing the queue at pit entrance. All these minor errors had to do with unannounced changes to the track, resulting in a slippery and unpredictable track to run on. This was because Pirelli was not informed of track surface changes done at the Shanghai International Circuit before of the Chinese Grand Prix's return. So, Pirelli couldn't provide the teams with up-to-date data. Track officials believed the bitumen layer should wear away after running, with the track rubbering up during free practice. But the threat of rain has raised concerns about a repeat of the 2020 Turkish Grand Prix, when rain sat on top of a freshly relayed surface, making conditions extremely difficult, which was seen during sprint qualifying. Pirelli were quick to respond on the changes and expectations. What's new is this layer of bitumen they put on top of the track. There was no resurface, no changes. A few changes to the curbs, but not to the track, Pirelli Motorsport boss Mario Isola said. As usual, we measured the track roughness and the level of grip with our systems. We found some inconsistencies in the grip around the circuit. I believe that also the drivers highlighted this. And the most important information is that I believe the track is going to change quite a lot during the weekend because this layer of bitumen is disappearing, especially on the racing line and not on the other lines. When they ran over this layer, the level of grip is good, so I'm expecting that on the racing line it will be a bit worse compared to the other parts of the track. But it's just an assumption because we were not informed of this work on the track, so we are trying to understand ourselves what is going to happen. But a lot of track evolution is expected. What are your thoughts on the first day of running in China? Will we see some more surprises during this weekend? Or will we see the usual running order if the track stays dry? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below.